Meeting for the first time. We're welcome anybody who might be watching from the outside, and we're going to start out with just some discussions. I really want to congratulate all of you on your wins on your races, and very nice. Nice to see some new faces in our committee room. We don't have a lot of rules, but we have some, and I think the only rule really is about respect. I mean, we gotta make sure that we're always respectful to one another and anybody that comes in. And if we do that, I think we'll always get along very well. And the other one is today's a little bit different because we had different meetings going on, but punctuality. I think the worst thing in the whole wide world is if we got people that want to see what's going on in this if we don't get started on time. So if everybody can be as punctual as they can. So as I said, we have some new committee members and we have a little bit of business to do. And I think what we would do first is let's just kind of go around and introduce one another and go from there. So starting over on this side.
Hi, yeah, I've been on this committee. This is my 39th year on this committee. And I enjoy it. I like the committee. I've been fortunate to serve on just transportation this committee. I represent the Grand Isle District in Colchester to make up one senatorial district. I've served with probably 12 to 15 different chairs. Him and I were here last year, and Senator Benning was our chair last year. And it's a very interesting committee, and we deal with the chair will explain. We deal with all the state funding, bonding money. You get a chance to really see how the government inside all the buildings that we model and rent and oversee, whether it's prisons or whatever we have. So I always find it very interesting every year, and I'm glad to be able to serve with the chair here this year. Like I said, we work together all day on transportation. With that, thank you for all joining this committee. It's great. Thank you. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Wendy Harrison. I'm here representing Windham County. I have a couple of overlaps with Bennington County. Happy to be here. And on behalf of the new people, the existing people have been very helpful and welcoming. And I appreciate that because it's got to be different for you to have this many new folks in your midst. But I felt nothing but welcome.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have people.
Which is great. Yeah, so I appreciate that. I've been in government, but in local government, this is it's different and the same at the same time. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can.
Glad you made a decision to run. That's a big challenge these days to run for office.
Yeah,
it was a lot of work.
And it was fun. I learned a lot that way too. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
I also have felt very welcome. Irene Renner running, having run for Chittenden North District, which is brand new. That would be Joe Benning's old seat.
Yeah.
Moved across the state.
That's a new seat.
It's a new seat.
That's where Joe was.
They took it and they moved it across to Chittenden County because there's just so many people in Chittenden County that they needed to find a new home for Milton, Westford, part of Essex, and then Fairfax in Franklin County. That's part of the district. So I also have my feet in two places. We'll see where we're all. And I too have local government experience to offer. Thanks for making this.
Thank you. So I'm Brian Collmore, representing the Rutland District. Senator Renner and I will follow a tradition that I've had since I've been here. This is my 5th term. So the first term, I was on health and welfare in the morning with Senator Polina. And then from that point on, we were together, both committees, all day long for the 10 years I've been here. We switched over to agriculture. By the way, Linda Lehman, our committee assistant, will also follow me around and Irene around the rest of the day because she's in agriculture in the morning.
Oh,
Okay.
So I served with Polina both in the morning and the afternoon the whole time I've been here. It just worked out that way. So this is my first year on institutions. Prior to that, I was on government operations for all 4 terms, and looking forward to kind of a change of pace, different jurisdiction. Obviously, we had elections over there, so I was vice chair of that reapportionment committee that decided about Chittenden North.
I'm grateful.
And we struggled, to be fair. I think it was 2 sessions ago where, and it was, to be fair, Senator Ashton came up with the idea
Yeah,
of splitting the
yes,
party,
yes, that was a
the
very
so-called six-pack, where 6 senators used to represent Chittenden County, and it was really hard for anybody
Oh.
new
terrible.
to get in there to run. So we took it apart, and when we put it back together, that was one of the Senate districts that we had. So,
You got somebody new to run.
yeah.
Well, one I found was Chittenden County, you have 6 senators. If they got a complaint, then all 6 of them tried to address the complaint and say, for example, if there was a highway issue, 6 senators would come to me where they only needed 2 senators or 1, you know, because they were so spread out. Milton and, Shelburne and Harrisburg, all the way down, well, not Harrisburg, but it was so big that for 6, I'm glad Senator Ash proposed that at least you have sections where now you can dedicate your effort to that
Yeah.
section, like the Uber or whatever.
So, there we go.
I'm Linda Lehman. I'm happy to be with this committee. This is all new jurisdiction for me to follow, so this is going to be very interesting. And I will be with 3 of us will move from room to room. Today you need to choose a clerk. And I would also like to pass around a piece of paper and just get anyone's cell phone numbers, home email if you have that, any contact, and I'll make a list of them so that you all have it, and so I have it in case we need to reach you in a quick period of time.
And Senator Russ Ingalls, I'm very honored again to be chair, and you're vice chair.
Yes.
And that's quite an honor as well, so we're both with honored with that. So as Linda said, we're tasked with having to do an electric clerk, and I don't know if you guys have done that in your morning committee yet. I would ask that one of you two make that decision, and I wouldn't be intimidated by it. I'm clerk of transportation, and we'll help you through all of that stuff. And what a clerk does is when we pass it, like today, I had some nominations that were passed from the Senate Secretary, and basically they give them to you, and then what we do is we come and we give them to Linda. Or when we do a committee vote, you guys, whichever one would call the roll, but you're not going to be tasked as far as doing something that you're unfamiliar with. We're going to help you all of that stuff. But when we do pass the bill, whoever's the clerk will be responsible to take it up to Secretary Bloomer and to make sure that gets on the calendar to go. And I would ask, is either one of you, well, actually, you're vice chair, so that's going to be a little bit tough. So, Irene, would you be
I'm gonna
clerk?
remind them.
Would you be clerk?
Sure.
Okay.
She's already clerk of the Ag Committee.
I'm gonna have lots of practice at.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Are you fine with that?
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Of course.
So
Thank you.
I will make sure that I'll let Secretary Bloomer's office know that that's where it's at. And at any time, what we're going to spend some time with here is we've got people coming in, and they're going to come in and they're going to tell you what our committee does. I really want to make sure that everybody in this room really understands the functions that we have and the important roles that we serve. And other than Dick or myself who have been here in the past, or Brian who's got institutional knowledge about that, I really want you to learn what goes on in this committee and what goes on. So we're going to bring in the experts, the people that we deal with all the time. I would always ask that if you ever have a question about anything, don't sit there and ever wonder what's going on. Ask the questions. And if somebody responds with an answer that you're still not sure, ask again. Just make sure that you understand really what's fully going on, and if there's some acronyms that are going on that you don't really understand, say, hey, what's that mean? What's that? I just really want everybody to be comfortable. You know, at the end of the day, we don't take a lot of votes, but the best thing in the whole wide world for me is to have 5-0 votes. They're awful. It's really, really good. We can all work together and understand the process, and everybody's comfortable with that. So I will just ask that all through any time that you have a question or concern, or if something wasn't right, or if something didn't set well with you, just to speak up and let us know what's going on. It's a fun committee. It's very fun. There'd be some, there's a lot of numbers to deal with as we get going. And one of the most terrifying times that you're ever gonna have in your life is when you have to report this on a Senate floor. And we're gonna make sure, and I'm gonna make sure that you are very well versed on everything that we do so that you can get up there with confidence and that you can get up there and you can report this stuff. And not only understand what the numbers are, but understand where the numbers are going, where the dollar amounts are going. We're probably gonna handle about 140, $50 million, Senator? Is that in the next couple of years? Yeah, we'll cut it back.
Ballpark.
And we'll find out what that number is when it's all said and done. But I think the first people are gonna be in here about 1:30 or so. So, and they're gonna start and they're gonna go in through, so. But please, please ask, please make sure you understand what's going on.
So I got a question.
Yep.
The bill that we get will come over from the other body, correct? So it starts over there. Are there any other issues or bills that we normally, I know this is, in the House, it's called corrections and institutions. So do we have any other jurisdictional issues here?
We're just the buildings part of the corrections. That's all we are. We really have no policy. We're really all about the buildings. And that's what we
The
do.
House did that a few years ago. Then
Yeah.
when it comes to the Dick Sears,
Well, the
judiciary part, we stick with
Yeah.
what it should have been. That's the way it was years ago. It was all
Okay.
buildings bonding. Then somehow the House, they put it corrections and they do both. But when it gets over here, it's kind of divided because we don't deal with anything in a policy like.
And that's a neat thing about this
Yes.
committee is that you're not, you might believe policy-wise, you might believe something totally different than what I believe, or you believe. Here, we're dealing with dollars and cents. It's either here or it's there. And that's a lot of where it's at. And they'll explain some of that more when they come in. They'll start nuts and bolts and they'll explain that. So we don't do a lot of policy stuff. I mean, I don't know what committees, you're on ag, so you probably deal with some policy over there. What's your morning committee?
Economics.
Economic, so you're dealing with policy stuff and stuff like that. We deal with mainly numbers. Numbers, and where do we plug those numbers in? It comes over from the House. They'll tear it up and they'll tear it up and they'll tear it up and then we fix it. And that's,
The governor drafts out his recommendations and then they you vote by that or up it or down it, wherever you want to. But the governor comes out with his proposal, where the money should be spent, whether it's correctional facility or wherever it's gonna be. But then you go from there. The chair says, do what you want to do.
there's one concept that we know right from the beginning. We know how much money we have.
Yeah.
It's just where do we put it? Where does it go? How does it get split up? And so the government does recommendations, gives it to the House, they'll tear it up and then they bring it to us and then we'll work on our side of it. And then we meet back up with the House and to see, and if we agree, we agree. If we don't, we go to conference. But I don't think, we didn't go to conference last year. And
No, it's pretty well decided. Years ago, we used to have school construction aid. And we dropped that many years ago. There's no more school construction. We used to pay 30% of the school bonding money. And we dropped that many years ago and that hasn't reoccurred again. So there's a lot less money we deal with because school construction ceased many years ago. School building is not building like they were. So as far as bills, we get very, very few bills. Last year we only had 4 or 5. Probably.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot you can do. And as the chair said, we focus on just the bonded money. And for bonded money, it has to do something at the 20-year life expectancy. You can't bond something for 3 years. So if we stick to that, it's very good. And we've been fortunate. We've done that. Years ago, I had some chairs that they would broaden. Go all over the place with a new building here or there, but those days are gone. And I think that the chair will vouch for it. We stick to what our jurisdiction is. We stick to that. And although we'd like to spend money on other things, we can't. You can, but it's not going to go far.
So how is the bonded money, how does a project get into that queue? Because I would think that would have happened years ago in many cases to get to this
A
point.
lot of it
right?
starts with the governor's budget. that's where it is. The governor starts that process, and then we further the process. And I don't know that we ever struck any money out and put it anywhere else. I think where we've always been somewhere along where what the governor has recommended. We tweak it here or there. We might have taken some out or put some in over there, but pretty much, it's not just the governor. It comes from the experts of with the policy of the
They
state.
spent months putting it together. They
Right.
started in October, the governor's office researching all the needs. Like I said, I keep bringing up correction facilities, but that's gotta happen someday. We're gonna do something, but the governor does all the research on all that, and sometimes it changes. Something that was $100,000 is now $150, because, the prices have gone up of materials and everything else, so, it changes. So by the time we get it, sometimes the price has gone up or down or not disaster, but something will happen in a state building somewhere that wasn't expected, like the system will go down or something. So they need another $150,000 for the heating system, which they didn't plan on 2 months ago. And so that's.
The HVAC system, so was very, very big last year as far as going, the air qualities and all the courthouses and all of that stuff. Where I think some of that softened a little bit as, the pandemic's wound down a little bit, but there's all real concerns. You're gonna see some projects as far as in communities. I know Newport was a benefactor of something probably 7-8 years ago where they put a walkway out through to connect some conserved land. You're gonna see where we spent money on the Long Trail. Public good, that's a lot of what it is. So public good to connect the lawn trail to make sure that there wasn't you used to be able to go to here, but then there was a piece of land in between. Now you gotta walk around and go through there. So, you'll see programs like that. I'm gonna say, and this isn't gospel, but you're probably going to see 30, 40 projects at this that we're going to be involved with. Probably even more than that. You're going to see some stuff with the Big E. We're responsible for that building down there at the Big E. It's we supply all the money for that. And last year they were in looking for big dollars for that because not much had been done to that building. I mean, they had big dollars for that. So you're gonna be a wealth of knowledge throughout all of the state as far as what's going on with some of these projects. You're going to feel very proud about, and then you're going to have some things that might infuriate you a little bit. You're going to see some things that go on with some projects and, oh man, how come we haven't pulled the plug on that thing? And you'll get some institutional knowledge as far as on that. Senator Mazza, who's been here for a long, long time, he's gonna be the wealth of knowledge to say, well, didn't we do this or didn't we do that? And why are we still doing stuff like that? So you're gonna see some really, really neat stuff. You're gonna see the microcosm of what Vermont is with all that we touch.
Great. Do we do field trips?
Yes, we haven't, but there's one that I would like to do, and we're gonna try to work it in. I'd like to go to Beta, and they've asked us to go to Beta. Last year we went to the museum in Barrie. What was that one? Remember what it was? We went down there, but one of the biggest things that I really want to make sure that we prepare you for, and it's the reporting on the floor isn't so hard the first year, but we got hammered the second year on there, and I just didn't really feel comfortable the way that it was, but we were very prepared for the second year, but a lot of the questions got asked about the first year again, and we just didn't spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to make sure that you don't feel the way that I felt when we come off of that floor that we weren't prepared. So we're going, there's going to be some work that we're going to do to make sure that you guys don't feel the embarrassment that I felt. And that was just one that I want to make sure that that never happens again. And I promise you, I will make sure that we are very, very well prepared to go up there, and that you can say to your colleagues that, hey, we worked really, really hard, and you're going to know the subject matter. You're going to know everything about that. But yeah, I wouldn't mind going to Beta myself.
Great. Thank you.
So We should have a company soon.
The people who are coming first are your legislative counselor and the joint fiscal office person who are associated with this committee, and they will be here a lot, especially the JFO fellow. And the attorney has 5 committees in the afternoon, so we're gonna try to get her at specific times. But I think the JFO person will be here. Is that your experience?
Yeah.
They're here quite a bit, because he has the spreadsheets and all the data that you need in your decision making.
One of the other things we're gonna try to do, and I meant to say this earlier, is that we have some downtime, which we wanna make sure it's not downtime. We wanna make sure we're doing our due diligence to learn what's going on. And so as the House is bringing in people to testify about what they have in front of them, the next day, we're gonna try to get them in here as well to talk about that, so that we don't just get that bill dumped in our lap and not understand what's going on. So as they're working on things the day before, the next day, I wanna bring those people that came in and testified to them and bring them in here, and that way, you have an understanding. And maybe what we can do, could we get a copy maybe of last year's, maybe just get a copy of last year's bill, the finished product of last year's bill, and so that you guys can kind of see what it looks like. And that way you can see all of what we've said about the subjects and where it touched and what the money went and all of that stuff. You're gonna see a lot of different subjects that you're going to be, that you're gonna need to be familiar with. You will be. So that would be very helpful.
Should we watch the House meetings if we have time?
Yeah, they get in the, this is what you're gonna, this
All
is
day long, you spend on the same.
Okay.
where we do 2 different committees and we get a lot done. They get in the weeds of things and
They spend weeks on one subject.
There's a lot of information will be on your webpage. And for those of you who haven't used it before, I'd be happy to sit down with you and just show you how to access the documents. Every day I put the documents on that are presented here. So you'll have them on your webpage. And if you have an iPad, that's a great way to reference them.
because you're given an iPad,
Yes.
right? That's very, very helpful. If Linda will show you how to do that, and you can get on there and you can see, like, you'll see okay, well, today, this is what we have going on. And then you can go to the House side of it too, and you can see what they've done as well.
And on the agenda changes often daily. So the most reliable resource is to go to the webpage. That's the first place I update it. I try to keep a list out front, but sometimes it's changing really fast and that is not accurate. I'm trying to keep it accurate, but it's not always accurate. So the first place to go is your webpage. Under your committee name, there's the place for agenda. And that's what's always the most up to date and can tell you what you need to know as far as getting to meetings and who's going to be here.
Thank you. Is it okay to bring a computer, a laptop?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, yeah, you want to bring a drink in, you want to bring something in, by all means, yes.
Can't bring it on the floor.
Right.
I know, that's
Yeah,
what
you
I'm
can bring it
asking.
in here, yeah. No, but you can bring a laptop, you can bring an iPad, you can have it open, you can do whatever you'd like to do.
Thank you.
And alcohol, okay.
No.
Unless you
No
share,
pets,
unless you
right?
share.
Can't bring my dog. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Are we good?
This is Dan Dickerson.
Hi, Dan. Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hey, good.
Welcome. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
So Dan, what we're trying to do is get an understanding about what we do here as a committee and what your role is and how it works and all of that. So the floor is yours and have at it.
Okay, great. For the record, my name is Daniel Dickerson. I'm with the Joint Fiscal Office. This will actually be my 2nd year working on the capital bill. So I've got a little bit of experience under my belt, but my colleague Becky Wasserman, who I'm sure will be in here at some point, will be the drafter. She's got a lot more, I guess, historical knowledge, as well as people that have been on the committee in the past. But I will do my utmost to make sure that, as far as the money, I can answer questions in a timely manner. As far as what your charge will be, you will be putting together the 2-year capital bill, or a 2-year capital bill that deals with state investments in mainly state buildings, state infrastructure, but also some water infrastructure, some grants, and we'll get into that as you. I did bring a spreadsheet from the last
That's helpful.
2-year capital bill, so I can pass that out and
Yep.
maybe
Absolutely.
maybe I can start to walk through that.
Thank you.
I won't start on this yet, but you're making investments in mainly state properties, and the funding source for these investments is borrowed money. So you're basically using the state's credit card to in a responsible way to make these important investments in state properties. And I guess to back up to where the credit card comes for, I guess where maybe the max, the credit limit for the credit card comes from. There's a committee called the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee that's headed by the state treasurer that meets every year, and they make a recommendation to the governor and the General Assembly for how much over a 2-year period the state can borrow. And the state borrows by issuing general obligation bonds. And these are bonds against the general revenues of the state. So we pay those bonds back using our general fund revenues, and that's done over the Appropriations Committee. But when the state issues those bonds, those dollars are going to the investments that you determine are needed for a 2-year period. So that's how the credit limit is established, is through this committee. So once that credit limit is established, the administration makes its determinations for what they believe should be the investments over 2 years. They bring those to you, and in a year 1 of this 2-year period, you're going to draft and release a capital bill, you and your colleagues in the House. And then in year 2, which I won't go into too much detail, but you'll do basically a budget adjustment. So you'll look back, say, okay, costs have increased here, or maybe this project has sort of slipped a little bit, so we can put that off and we can use this money elsewhere. So there's an adjustment in year 2, but year 1, which is what you're in now, you'll be putting all of these investments into a bill and making appropriations.
Maybe one project wasn't ready as ready as what they were, so reallocate that monies into something different.
Exactly. So I think now I'll refer a little bit to the spreadsheet. Becky and I have been with the House Committee last week, and we sort of did things one way, and I guess I'll sort of stick to that. And it helped having the spreadsheet, so you can see sort of how it's structured, but also it helps put some context behind how the bill is put together. So that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So this is in some way, shape, or form, you will have a spreadsheet throughout the session as you work through the governor's budget, and then what comes over from the House, and then what you ultimately decide in the Senate. And so, the format may change. You might see some columns for what the governor recommended and what the House has done, but it's sort of overall it's the same format. This happens to be the spreadsheet that reflects what was enacted 2 years ago when the last General Assembly made its 2-year capital budget. And so the layout as far as what's being spent, most of these first few pages are all the projects that you're funding, and then the last page is sort of, all right, where's the money coming from, and how does the bottom line shake out once you compare expenses to the funding sources. As far as the columns here, obviously column A is just sort of numbering all the different lines so that instead of reading out the whole thing, we can say, oh, line 11, something's wrong here, let's talk about that. Section D is where I would.
Sorry, get up.
Section D is where I would basically tie the spreadsheet to the bill language that you might be looking at. And so, for example, on line 3, the statewide major maintenance, if you wanted to look at where that falls in the language, you would go to the bill that you would be working through to section 2B1 or 2C1. The reason there are 2 sections is that for a 2-year capital bill, you're making an investment in year 1 and an investment in year 2. So for the upcoming bill, you're going to be talking about FY24, state fiscal year 24 and state fiscal year 25. I might throw out acronyms and then not explain them. Feel free to stop and say, wait, hold on a second. I'll try not to do that. But state fiscal year 24, state fiscal year 25. So column C is, a brief description of what you're funding or what the project is. And then J is where, at least for this spreadsheet, J is where the FY22 appropriations are listed. K is where the FY23 appropriations are listed, and then L is where their total that has sum together. So you're the 2-year total for that. The biggest chunk of what you're typically going to fund in a capital bill is going to be managed by the Department of Buildings and General Services, and I think you're going to hear from them after Becky and I go. But they manage most of the projects on state government buildings and properties. There are a few other agencies that do their own management, and the Agency of Natural Resources being one. But BGS really does the heavy lifting here. And going down section 3 on line 26 that says Agency of Human Services. This is a project that falls under that realm, but BGS is still managing the projects for them, and the same with Commerce and Community Development. Building communities grants, I'll confess I don't have a whole lot of background on these, but I do know that this is funding that typically is going to go, I think, to municipalities through various grant programs. Going down there investments, at least in the most recent capital bill, that go to Agency of Education, University of Vermont, Vermont State Colleges. I guess the makeup of this is really going to depend on what the governor proposes and what you.
Yeah, so some of these categories might not make the list this time. It might be just a total different categories. But as I said earlier, you can see what we cover is just a vast slice of what Vermont's all about and where the projects need to be developed.
And that's what's really interesting about the quote unquote being on a money committee is that you really see everything. You see that all that government does, and that's really cool.
I like the idea that we have a limit to what we spent years ago. There was no limit. And you were bonding for.
Really? So they would make that decision in here?
Yeah, I remember 111 million a year, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Now you got guidelines. Oh, change it. At least you know what the wants are. This is nice, you work it up. What is it this year?
It's going to be 54 million. The 2-year total is 108 million.
Yeah.
And that's actually a fairly substantial decrease from
Yeah.
the last 2 years. I think it was 123 million.
Yeah.
So the box has gotten smaller.
We're just in time. Was
But-
that because of COVID?
Yeah.
That the box got bigger?
Why is it, Dan? Why is it less?
You'll probably get more information when the treasurer's office comes in. But basically, the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, or CDAC, has sort of been leaning towards it. They've been slowly decreasing their recommendation. The reason they didn't, it was actually the same for 2 bienniums. The reason they didn't decrease the last biennium is just due to COVID. There was the thought that we really need to make these investments regardless of how that impacts how the credit rating agencies view us and so on and so forth. But the drivers are, there are certain metrics that CDAC is supposed to look at per statute. I don't know them all off the top of my head. They basically pertain to, what are our demographics looking like? What is our debt per capita? How are our pensions funded? And there are other things that, like I said, I don't have memorized, but pensions, even though we passed the reform bill, there's still a lot of unfunded debt that the credit agencies certainly look at, and it certainly impacts our ability to borrow and do other things. Demographics, while we think that we've improved a little bit due to COVID and people coming from out of state, it's still it's a much older state than the rest of the country, and that impacts, the income per capita. So
keep your ratings good too.
Yeah, how is
yeah,
that?
and the outgoing treasurer, I guess the previous treasurer now, she was really focused in on like a laser on those ratings. The incoming treasurer, I don't know I don't know what his priorities are going to be as far as what CDAC does.
And how is our bond rating versus
we're in sort of the middle upper tier. I would say upper tier nationwide. We're about the middle New England. I can find that information, but I can email each of you after this the report. So CDAC issues a report, I think each year, that's going to have a lot of really good information on what their decision-making process is, what are how do we compare to other states. But I do believe as far as our ratings, and there are 3 primary rating agencies that issue ratings for states. We're upper tier nationally, but we're sort of in the middle, New England Northeast. So we're okay, but we could certainly, if you're really focused on those ratings, we can certainly improve. And hopefully the fact that we've funded a little more of our pensions. I don't think we've actually gotten an updated rating since that bill was enacted. So we could see some movement, or at least the rating agencies going, we're not going to increase your credit rating, but we acknowledge that you've made some good progress. And so you sort of have a positive outlook going forward. And they do things like that. They say, we're not going to change you, but you have a positive or negative outlook based on these trends. So beware.
Giving you the heads up for which way you're going, up or down.
Yeah. So yeah, when you have the treasurer's office, or if and when, I'm sure they'll come in at some point, they'll have a lot more detail as far as what CDAC looks at. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So going back to the spreadsheet, I guess just going through these different sections give you a flavor of how things will look, but obviously this, what agency is covered in each section might change based on what the bill is. So there might be different projects every biennium. So on page 2, like I said, the Agency of Natural Resources is one of the state agencies that manages their own projects. And a big piece of what they do, well, 2 big pieces of what they do, you fund monies that go into revolving funds for drinking water and for clean water. And that provides match for federal dollars that come down. And it's not reflected here because the first year of the last biennium was prior to the passage of the federal infrastructure bill, but there's a lot of new federal money coming that will require more state match, and some of that state match was provided in the capital budget adjustment last year, but I'm sure that there will be pressure for more this year. And whether the governor recommends funding that through the capital bill or maybe shifting some of that to general fund just because you're not able to borrow as much this biennium. I don't know what the governor will recommend, but it's possible that that will be a pressure in the capital bills to get more of that match out the door, or at least available. Section 10 clean water, this has been an ongoing investment to the tune of about 10 to 11 million annually, as part of the state's overall investments in cleaning up our Lake Champlain and our other waterways, getting the phosphorus and in some cases nitrogen flows mitigated. So you'll most likely see this in the upcoming capital bill. And then going forward, there's some more small investments that, as far as the agencies and the amounts may or may not be there when the governor makes a recommendation and when the House makes its recommendation. So those are the investments. Those are basically the expenses. And then on page 3 is where the funding for those expenses comes together. I'm going to skip to line 153, the capital borrow. So here you see in column J where in the last biennium, the General Assembly had 123,180,000 that it could borrow for a 2-year period. So when you get the spreadsheet for this coming biennium, you're going to see 108 million. That's your credit limit, and that's going to be, that money is going to come through the issuance of general obligation bonds. The other primary funding source going back up is through what's called reallocations or potentially transferred, mostly reallocations, and that starts on line 138. And so what this is as you review the proposed capital bill, you can look back at some of the previous investments that you've made or appropriations that you've made and ask, and in the case that funds aren't being spent in a timely manner, you could ask agencies, hey, what's going on here? In some cases, it's, the funding is obligated. It may not show up in the state's accounting system, and they'll explain that. So that sort of takes it off the table. Or they'll say, this project slowed down for X reason, or, we're going slower, or maybe it just can't happen anymore. Something happens, or the project's completed and it's under budget, which does happen, I think, sometimes. But they can say, we don't need this money anymore. So you can pull back a part of a previous appropriation and reallocate it here to give you a little bit more spending power in the capital bill that you're working on. And so that's, if you look at lines 139 through 148, that's what they did in the past, is they look back at some projects where they either decided to go a different path, or the project was slow, or some reason they pulled back some money and put it towards the FY22-23 capital bill.
We had a project this summer that the governor alerted us to, and that one of the projects was, we're just running over budget, just the way that it was, and it was like $5 million or something like that. And so that's what they did, is they went back into one of these programs that wasn't getting funded, or they didn't need to get funded yet, or whatever, and they reallocated those funds to further the other project to keep it on track. So.
And I think, I can't remember where they pulled, I think it was the Williston Barracks.
That was the Williston Barracks that we were actually looking for the dollars for.
Yeah, and I can't remember where the money was pulled from, but I believe most likely the governor's capital bill proposal is gonna propose backfilling that project where he pulled the money from to put towards Williston. So I imagine that'll come up in the upcoming capital bill. But yeah, I believe in that case, because the legislature wasn't in session, the E-board had to, the emergency board had to sign off on that shift of funding. So on line 157, when you total the 2-year sort of credit card limit plus those reallocations, you've got roughly 127 million to spend. So now if we go down to the summary, line 160, the 70 million, that's what the General Assembly decided to spend in year 1. They had the 127 million available, which left 57 million that could then be spent in year 2. And that's what, if you go to column K, They spent 57 million, they have 57 available to choose from. So that's typically what you will see. Last year in the previous capital budget adjustment, we did leave a little bit of spending capacity on the bottom line. I believe it was about 4 million. And that was a decision that you folks made in the Senate at state of the bill. So it's possible that, some money could be left on the bottom line. I think typically they draw down to zero.
I'm afraid this year with inflation of everything, cost of everything's gone up, labor, material, that's gonna be, I know, 26 million spent on paving, but I know we didn't do much more we did last year because the cost was up 30%, 40% on paving, so I think it's gonna happen here too.
That'd be interesting to look at some of the projects that we made commitments to and to see where they're at. I think, I agree with you, Sam. I bet we're gonna see a lot of things that might be a little short.
Labor shortage, material shortage, they've had to pay a lot more. We had one bid on paving went from 10 to 16 million, $6 million over on that because it was a night paving. And you couldn't get people to work nights. They had to pay double with the trucks. It's crazy what's happening in this inflation.
Can I ask a question to that? If we thought that prices were going to go down, which in some cases might be possible, right? Because we're just in this crisis right now. Could we push projects out to the years when we thought there would be more of a likelihood of a
Some
price?
can't postpone, some
Right.
are critical,
Right.
but there's no guarantee it's gonna go down. That labor shortage is here for a while. I think diesel fuel, those things aren't gonna go back for some time. Yeah. I hope so, you're right.
There is,
Curious about it.
Yeah.
If we can only, are
We
we
can-
only
we can ask
looking
those
2
questions.
years or
can ask
can we
those
look?
questions.
even- Okay.
Oh, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. I can answer that question a little bit in the sense that what you'll be getting from BGS actually will include a 10-year capital plan. So the 2 years are sort of their idea of what they're going to do these next 2 years, but then they have their sense of what they will be trying to get done over a 10-year period. So I think part of what they're trying to estimate is, what can be done now and what can be pushed off a little bit.
Thanks.
Howard, you good?
I was just gonna add a little bit, one topic that CDAC really focused in on is that we have a lot of, I'd say, authorized but unissued debt right now. And that's because there's just this huge backlog of projects. And I think, BGS sort of said during the CDAC meetings that it was making progress, and they might say the same thing to you. But I would say that as agencies come in and testify, look back to what has been funded over the past 5 or 6 years, because there might be opportunities to, if a project just very clearly isn't going to happen on the timeline that originally was imagined to happen, there's an opportunity to say, okay, let's take that money and put it to something that's shovel ready, and then maybe if it doesn't need to be dealt with immediately, then maybe put that off. So I think that's another area where there's potential opportunity. I don't want to get out in front of agencies because they know more about what's going on than I do, but I know that's something that your House colleagues look at pretty closely is what you've done in the past, what you've authorized in the past and where they are in that process. But other than that, I've gotten through the spreadsheet, so that's all I have for you, and I can let.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it very much. Very helpful. Becky?
Hi, I'm Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. I am attorney with Ledge Council, so I will be working with this committee on drafting bills, primarily the capital bill, but also I will have drafted most of the bills that come to this committee. My subject area covers, state facilities, construction, and some of the other topics that are under this committee's jurisdiction. So I will be in here walking through a bill that I have drafted for a member, or also on the capital bill. So when the capital bill starts in the House, I am usually kind of back and forth between here and the House committee,
Is the capital bill your main job? As well? I know you have a lot of hats, but.
It is, I would say it's like, I don't know, some percentage of like 25 to 30% of my portfolio. So I cover other things like pensions, state contracting, state grants, some tax topics, some economic development. So I tend to be in a lot of different committees on those topics as well, but I do spend a lot of my time on the capital bill. I wasn't sure exactly what you wanted to start with today, but I did prepare a presentation just with like an overview of the capital bill, and Dan went over a lot of the language. The spreadsheet, so I may be repeating some of what he said, but I thought it may be helpful just to see the structure of the.
Do what you do. So we're just trying to get the newer members to understanding, and then it certainly doesn't hurt Senator Mazza and myself to have, a fresher understanding of it as well. So yes, please.
So I'm gonna try to join the Zoom meeting again without making a lot of noise this time, so I can share. Hopefully this works.
Just put myself in.
Your co-host.
Oh, now I am.
So you can just.
Says I'm not able to screen share.
The document is on your webpage under today's date. And Becky, if you like, I could probably show that here in the truck.
Okay, if you're able to screen share it, I can just use it.
Let me see if I can get it.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, it's on.
Okay, so yes, I will have to rely on you to.
We'll tell you when.
Okay. So just, I think you've probably all heard this before. This is very introductory, but
It's fine. We don't mind that.
So the bill that you will be working on, we refer to it as a capital bill. You'll see it when the bill is introduced that it's actually called the Capital Construction and State Bonding Act. I think there are sort of three main things this bill does. So it is containing the authorization for the state to incur debt through bonds for capital projects. And that's what Dan was just talking about with the CDAC recommendation. It sets out all the spending for state capital projects, and those are all the appropriations that you're going to be making for different projects. And then there's going to be certain policy initiatives that relate to state capital projects. And the policy part of the bill is sort of the main, the language part of the bill. And on the next slide, thank you, Linda, just sort of a background on capital expense. I think maybe Dan touched on this, but
I didn't go to.
okay. So there actually is no statutory definition for what we mean by a capital expense, but generally we're talking about an investment that will last and have a useful life of at least 20 years. And if you think about it, you're bonding for a 20-year period, so you want to have what you're bonding for last at least that long. There is some language in statute about the kinds of eligible expenses, and all it really says is that you can, in the capital bill, you can have activities proposed for funding by general obligation bonds that are restricted to tangible capital investments. And this also includes planning and design. And so that's related to that capital investment. And so you will see that some of the line item appropriations in the bill are related to planning and design for these projects. And I just put examples of, real estate, buildings, construction, renovation of buildings, and purchase of certain machinery or equipment. So in terms of,
I figured, I'm gonna wait for you to tee you up on that a little bit later. I already warned them about, there might be some projects that might get you ire. And he's already whispered under his breath about one of them, but you'll find out soon enough. You will find out.
so I think you'll hear from BGS in a moment, but the way the process works is that sort of before session in the fall and the early winter, BGS is working with other executive branch agencies and departments to sort of project what their yearly capital expenditures are in the context of their 10-year capital plan. So they're saying, here's the money we need for these projects, and then they look at how much money is available and then put together what they're proposing based on that projection is what the governor proposes as the executive branch's annual capital budget request to the General Assembly. And you will get a book from BGS that sort of describes each project, how much money they're requesting. You'll also see in that book what was requested that they did not include in the governor's annual budget request. And of course, the legislature can decide to do what the governor has requested or to do something different. They can look at some of those other projects and say, maybe we can give some money to that. The capital bill typically starts in the House Committee on Corrections and Institutions, and includes these requests to fund new and existing capital projects, policy initiatives, and sometimes there's also some technical amendments in there relating to past capital bills. And then the committee, starts with that request as the basis for the capital bill process. This is the first year of the biennium. The capital bill process is a 2-year budget. So in the first year, you're going to be appropriating money for this fiscal year and for the next fiscal year. And then the second year of the budget is called the budget adjustment. And so that is going back and looking at, so next year you'll go back and look at what you did this year, and you will either adjust it by, adding money to a project, taking money away, adding new projects. And you'll do that based on, information you have about whether a project is moving forward, whether they need more money, an example of inflation and how that's impacted the progress that a project has received. And then the second year of the bill is called the Capital Budget Adjustment Act. And that tends to be smaller because you've sort of appropriated most of the money in the first year of the bill.
Well, we'll be expected to see Becky and Dan when we have the bill, when we already see some monies that were carried over, the money that wasn't expended. So on top of maybe the 108,000, we might see a certain amount of funds that need to be reallocated.
Yeah, and I'll get, there is a section on reallocations,
Okay.
but that's correct. There'll be some additional money aside from what CDAC has recommended for bonding in unexpended funds. And so I just wanted to go through the structure of the bill, which is what I am drafting for you. And so the bill is divided into 2 parts. The first part is the money section of the bill, and that includes the appropriations for capital projects. Sometimes there's some related policy language that is like very specific to a certain line item. But typically the second part of the bill is where you'll see the policy language and any, you know, authorities that you're asking, you know, agency to take with respect to a capital project. And then I just wanted to note the first section of the bill is typically an intent section. And so this is where you're saying, you know, it's the legislature's intent to, you know, spend, you know, of the amount that's authorized in the bill, spend a certain amount in the first year. And then the remainder will be appropriated in the second year. And there's also, in the first year of the biennium, there's also sort of an acknowledgement that whatever you're appropriating this year can be adjusted next year. You can't bind the future legislature, but you're saying, you know, we're expecting that some of these numbers may change next year. And so on the money section of the bill, and you saw this in the spreadsheet, but it follows typically a similar format every year. And I just listed, I think, the typical sections where there are appropriations. So there's state buildings, which is the projects that you know, primarily BGS is overseeing. And then there's, you know, human services, judiciary, and the whole list there. And sometimes BGS is the one who's actually doing the work for human services, for example, and sometimes human services is doing the work, and that is usually noted in the language. And then in terms of the structure of the money section on the next slide, thanks. So I like to think of the money section as basically just the spreadsheet in words. So Dan and I work together throughout this process to make sure that all the line items in the spreadsheet and the numbers match up to what is in the bill. And we also make sure, for example, the subdivisions, you know, in this section 2, B1 would be the same B1 in the spreadsheet. The state buildings, section 2 is typically the largest section where you'll see the appropriations. And as I mentioned, those are the ones to BGS. And then one thing you'll see in terms of the language, and this is something we'll work on during the process and during markup of the bill, is that the line item appropriations have different levels of detail depending on what the project is. So in this example, this is from last year's bill, you know, major maintenance and BGS engineering and architectural project costs, those are pretty much the same every year in every bill. Number 5, for example, 108 Cherry Street parking garage repairs.
Here we go. Easy, Senator. Remember your heart.
So you'll see other examples like this where there's a specific address and then, you know, what's happening there. And then there's some even more details. I think it was last year's bill where it was or 2 years ago, where it was very specific about, you know, the carpeting in the State House being replaced, but it said like where in the State House it was exactly the carpeting was being replaced. And so, you know, we'll work on that in the language based on the information that BGS is providing to us, just so it's clear what the money is for. Are there any questions?
You're doing great. You're doing a really good job.
So, and then in terms of the money sections, you'll see in every section of the money section, there's the total amount for each fiscal year, as well as the total appropriation for the section. And of course, those will match up to what is in the spreadsheet that Dan is providing. And then I also just wanted to give an example of the kind of policy language you might see in the money section of the bill. So this was in last year's bill. So this has to do with an appropriation for a summer heating system for the State House. And this is saying, you know, for the amount of money that's appropriated for that, the legislature is, you know, directing BGS to do something specific with that amount of money. So that's an example of where sometimes there's policy language in the money section of the bill tied to a line item appropriation.
May I ask you just a question?
Please do.
So when you say something specific, do you mean the consistent with the state energy plan, or do you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry, I
The
mean with for
second
the
thing.
amount appropriated in subdivision C15. So if you had the bill in front of you, you would look to C15 and the amount appropriated there was for the heat source for the summer months in the city house. And then the second part of the bill is the policy section. And the order of that is sort of based on what comes over from the governor's annual capital budget request and what the governor's proposing. And then any other capital related policies that the legislature would like to address that year. Typically is just in the bill in sort of alphabetical order based on the name of the department or agency. This was from last year's bill. This example I have up here about a study committee for how to use the former Southeast State Correctional Facility. So that's one kind of policy action you see in the bill. There's also usually an authority to sell a building or a piece of land, sometimes reporting requirements or other kinds of study committees on use of space or buildings. And then to the reallocation question, there is a section of law that says that if an amount of money was appropriated in a capital bill and it has been unexpended for a 2-year period, that has to be reported to the House and Senate committees. And then you all decide, you know, can we move that unexpended money and reallocate it to something else in the capital bill? Or is there, you know, a good reason that it hasn't been spent yet and do we keep it to that project? And I would say that committees have found a fair amount of money over the years. I think when we first started, it was a pretty high amount of money, like maybe like 14 to 20 million. I think the first year we did it. And now it's just like, was it a few million last year?
Yeah, it's 2 or 3 million.
Yeah, so it's gotten less and less as people, I think, learn to spend the money.
They're smart, they spend.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
We'll turn it back in.
No.
it does add to the bottom line of what you're able to spend when you sort of go back and take from something that has been unexpended for more than 2 years. And you get to say, you know, if you want to reallocate it to just sort of the bottom line of the capital bill or reallocate it to a specific project. And that is in the reallocation section of the bill. And then finally, there's sort of the other authority in the bill that relates to just authorizing the treasurer to issue the amount of bonds that are used to pay for all the expenditures in the bill. And this amount, as we discussed, is based on what CDAC recommends. And then there are also, there is also bond premium that can be authorized in this section. I have never quite figured out how to explain it, so maybe Dan can. But oftentimes it's an additional amount of sort of unexpended, the capacity, the bonding capacity is there, but it's unissued capacity.
I was not even gonna touch on it.
Okay.
Frequent flyer miles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that also tends to add some additional money to the bottom line of what can be spent each year. So that was what I prepared. Hopefully that was helpful. I just wanted to give a very general overview of the
Very
bill.
helpful.
Very helpful,
Yes.
very helpful. Both of you, thank you
Yeah.
very much for that.
If there's
Any questions before Dan and Becky are done? Committee?
Thank you.
Oh, everybody good?
Right.
And I'll email you all that CDAC report, so you have that, and you'll also have my email address. If you have questions, I'm here for you, so feel free to email myself or Becky.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much, appreciate you coming in. Mr. Philpott, how are you?
Hi,
Eric.
Well, and happy to be here. Eric Schulkorn, BGS.
Now you got the experience.
Thank you very much.
My crew has.
Are you, is your crew coming?
Yes, I can vamp until they get here.
Yeah, let's take a 2-minute break.
Yeah.
Everybody want to take a 2-minute break?
Sure.
Yep.
Oh, that's all right. No.
Good.